Cares parent information sessions. Presenting with me this evening is Monica Quinn, who oversees our elementary special education, and then Ryan Snyder, who sees the secondary. I oversee both the special education and the pupil services side, but we really do work as a team. All three of us follow up on each other's cases and support each other in all of the buildings. So it's not uncommon for a parent to see one of us at one of their meetings, supporting the team. Also in the department with administration are our school psychologist and our home and school visitor. Together, we support the entire district on the needs of the students. This evening, we hope that we can present the process and procedure of what's known as eligibility determination. So students that are in the special education support services programming found their way there through an eligibility determination evaluation. We also hope to share information of the guardian's role, parent and guardian's role in the process, as well as to answer some of the questions that concerns about the overall process itself. What is special education? Without using a lot of formal language, special education is supports and services provided to a student who's found eligible based on their current unique needs and circumstances at the time of the evaluation. It is our goal to offer all students found with a disability an appropriate and free public education. You'll hear those terms often, FAPE and IDEA, but really what they are is making sure that you have supports and services that allow your child to grow and learn, and they meet the requirements of IDEA. Under our school code, which is special education, is chapter 14. That's the chapter of educational guidelines that special education functions under. What special education is not? It's a service and not a place. We strive to have all of our students in the general education arena as much as possible, delivered the same services of all students and having them access the general education content. It's not necessarily something that should make their day easier. It should level the playing field and provide them with intervention services and supports that allow them to learn and grow with their disability on par as all children in the district. And an individualized support services is really addressing a core area of weakness that can't be supported through interventions and differentiation that's found in all of general education. Chapter 4, all of general education. We are required to offer supports and services and interventions to all students. So it isn't the first source of support for our students that face struggles. All children struggle at some point academically and socially in their educational career. And our job is to support them through that with many layers of supports and services. You'll often hear people talk about Child Find. So Child Find is our system of finding students that may need and meet criteria for special education eligibility. Often families are not aware that we have a full screening process in general education. We screen all of our children regularly. General education and special education students go through a screening process. We look at their academic record at the moment in time, where they would expect it to be on par with all children in a range of scores, some a little higher and some a little lower. And it is not uncommon for a student to be functioning below grade level and not need special education supports and services, or a child working above grade level that may not yet qualify for supports and services. Information for our parents and our caregivers. We want to share how your child, if they have an IEP or a GIEP, how they qualified and met eligibility for that, as well as all of the supports and services that we have for children in our district. So we want to start with the pathways to special education because it isn't generally a speedy process. We take our time. We really want to make it a thoughtful process to find students that have truly a disability and not just an area of weakness that we can support them through. We have assessments in what we call reasonable intervals. So you might hear benchmark assessments and scoring through the year. We look at a student's attendance records and their report cards and their grades. Our wonderful school nurses do all of the required medical screenings of hearing and vision, weight management. All of those things are part of a student's educational record. And utilizing the district's multi-tiered system of supports, which we refer to as MTSS, which all of our students are entitled to receive supports and services in that tier process. It's actually the first beginning source of support all children should receive once we've identified a potential academic area of weakness.
So I'm going to jump in.
Oh, go ahead, Micah.
I'm going to jump in at this point and talk a little bit more about the MTSS process that Ms. McClure just mentioned. I think that it's important that it's interventions that are available for all students. So we are looking at making sure that every student that works, that attends our district has anything that they need to succeed academically, behaviorally, as well as social emotionally. We do that by first ensuring that they're tier one. So we call each of the steps kind of in this process a tier. So tier one is their general education core instruction. We want to make sure that that's high quality and that the general education teachers are delivering their content with fidelity, and they're also providing students that may need a little bit of extra support, the support they need at that tier one level. As part of our universal screening process, we are collecting data, like Ms. McClure said, at multiple intervals throughout the school year. So early on in the school year, we're collecting some academic as well as social emotional data on our students. Once all of that data is collected through our universal screening process, we look at all of the students as a whole and determine which students are showing at risk academically and at risk social emotionally. And at that point, with that data, we're able to act quickly and provide interventions based on that data for those students who need it. We call that the second tier, tier two. So that's targeted, supported interventions for students who may need additional support over and above what is happening within the general education classroom. The tier two supports can be provided in a variety of ways. So sometimes at the tier two level, the general education teacher is providing small group targeted instruction. And in other cases, an interventionist, a reading specialist, or potentially a school counselor is also intervening at this level. The important thing to note is that even at this level, a specific area of concern is targeted through more data. So it's another opportunity to select an area of intervention, provide some instruction around that skill, collect more data, and that helps to determine the effectiveness of the intervention. Following a cycle of support at the tier two level, usually a period of like 4 to 6 weeks or so, the data is reviewed as a whole. Again, if the student is making progress or perhaps remediated the area of weakness, the student may resume back into tier 1 instruction. If the tier 2 intervention is providing effectiveness, but we might need a little more of it, we might stay the course in that tier 2 intervention. In some cases, the tier 2 intervention is not proving to be successful, and we might do one of two things at that point. In some cases, we change the tier 2 intervention, and in some cases, we layer on another support system, and that would be through tier 3. And that's a more individualized, more targeted support in addition to the tier 2 intervention, again, to help the student continue to make progress within supports that are available for all students. We follow through with that same data collection cycle where we select a specific skill to intervene on. We collect data on the effectiveness of that intervention, and then the team comes back together to take a look at how the student is progressing. Something important that's not on this slide is that as a parent, you should be part of that process. And your general education teams at your building levels will kind of walk you through each of those steps if your child is a child who may need an intervention at one of these tiers. Another important thing to note about the MTSS process is that it's not a gateway to special education services. It's a process that we use through a data collection cycle to provide interventions to all students. Even there are students who are receiving special education services who still receive supports at tier 2 or tier 3. Students, like I said a few moments ago, are able to remain in an intervention at the tier 2 or tier 3 level if the intervention is proving effective. And sometimes it takes multiple cycles to either show the effectiveness of interventions, close gaps, or remediate weaknesses, or just, because that's who the student is. At any point, though, within this cycle of support, an evaluation could be recommended. So there could be a situation where, in spite of adjusting the intervention, and providing more intensive interventions, your student isn't showing good response to the intervention that's happening, or there could be other signs present that could indicate the presence of a special education disability that requires the direct instruction or specially designed instruction, which we'll talk about as we kind of continue through the presentation.
And I want to just review a little bit about the evaluation itself. When we decide to evaluate a student, it is typically because all of the support and services that we have provided hasn't yielded the success or bridged a gap that allows them to remain successful as an active participant in that general education arena. And now you have what's known as a suspected disability. When you have a suspected disability, then evaluation is the next step in the process, I should say. And an evaluation is really where we begin to look at proposed recommendations and gain parents' understanding and parents' permission. So the evaluation is recommended to a parent through a team process, and what's known as a permission for an initial evaluation for a suspected disability is created and then offered to the parent. In order for that evaluation to move forward, a parent must give permission. They're also able to decline and continue on in a system of supports, or they can request an informal meeting. Sometimes parents are hesitant to really want to understand the evaluation process more in depthly, and you can request an informal meeting, and we can, at that point, answer any further additional questions that you have. And we often invite the school psychologist into that process so that they can speak explicitly about the assessments, the reasons for assessments, and what that information might provide to us. to see if there is a suspected disability and how we might begin to remediate that in specially designed instruction. The evaluation will tell us if there is an academic or social emotional area of weakness, and then how to proceed with that area of weakness. What is not well known is that a student can have a disability and not yet meet eligibility criteria because it is what is known as a two-pronged process. First, you have to meet and be found to be eligible to have a disability, and it must have an educational impact on your success in the general education arena. It must meet both of those criteria for a student to be eligible as a student with a disability and in need of specially designed instruction. And specially designed instruction is instruction that is not offered to all students. It is special to your child's area of need in the certain circumstance at the time that this is occurring. So all of those things are taken into consideration, which is why we take our time, we do our due diligence. We don't just want to offer an IEP so a student can get support. We're making a very important decision on a disability, and we want to make sure that we have fully explored any other options prior to looking and determining a student as disabled in the eyes of the state, under IDEA, and under Pennsylvania School Code. What people don't understand is there are 13 areas of eligibility in Pennsylvania, and we evaluate for all suspected areas of disability based on the information that we receive from parents, the data from the schools, areas of weakness. So we look at anything from intellectual disability, which is considered what we call a complex needs student, to emotional disturbance, orthopedically impaired. Speech and language is an area of disability and also a related service. We look for autism, and these are all known as school-based eligibility categories. Some in this list are also medical-based, but we are looking for a school-based eligibility when we are evaluating students for IEP level services. And then these are all of related services. I try to explain related services as services that are related to your known area of disability. Speech and language can be both a primary area of disability and a related service. It's one of the few that offers what I call the dual eligibility. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, audiology, social skills, counseling, parent support, transition planning, are all things that are related and can be supported with a child with a disability if their data supports a need in that related service area. The evaluation is completed, so now what? And the now what is going to be covered by Mr. Ryan Snyder.
Thank you. So let's kind of recap where we are in the pathway. The first part was we screened our student. We thought that there may be a disability, or it was brought up to us, and the student went through an evaluation and they are found to be eligible for special education or not eligible. Once that evaluation is completed, it will be provided to the parent, and a review will be offered with the school psychologist to go over the findings of that report. And again, it would be one of two things. They are eligible for special education, they have a disability and are in need of specially designed instruction, and therefore eligible for an individualized education plan, or they are not eligible through that evaluation process. If the student is found not to be eligible, the district would issue what is called a notice of recommended educational placement, saying that there is no eligibility for IEP level of services. If a student is found eligible, however, the special education teacher, the student will be known to have a disability and require an individualized education plan, a special education teacher would reach out to schedule an IEP, the initial IEP meeting, within 30 calendar days of the parent receiving that evaluation report. So that's a very big thing, because later on in this presentation, we'll talk a little bit about timelines. A timeline for the evaluation previously was it would be completed in 60 days of once that permission is returned back to the district. And then after the evaluation is completed, if the student is found eligible, an IEP would be presented to the family within 30 calendar days. So that takes us into kind of the individualized education program. Special education is a world of acronyms, and this one goes by IEP, which is probably the most common that a lot of people know. What is an IEP, though? It's actually a written statement of the educational program that the district is providing, designed to meet that individual student's needs. Once a student has an IEP, it must be updated at least one time per year. You will hear Ms. McClure, myself, and Ms. Quinn say it is a living document. It is something that can be revisited and opened and discussed at any time. Everybody who is a member of that team, whether it's a regular education teacher, a principal, a supervisor of special ed, a parent, the student, can say, I'd like to bring the team together to discuss some changes to my IEP. But at minimal, it would be updated annually. What it does include is information from the evaluation, if it was recent, or if it is a student who has been eligible before, information reflecting upon the previous IEP. Teachers will give all their input about the student. Parents as well, they are a key member of the IEP team, and then students when that becomes applicable. Obviously, sometimes asking a first grader and second grader who is maybe just found eligible what they need in that moment is a little difficult for them. However, as students get older, when they are sophomores and juniors and seniors, they do become a much more integral piece to the IEP process. Part of the IEP is to develop a measurable annual goal. So that is basically a statement, a goal that the district would say that within the next year, within the next time frame of this IEP, with appropriate instruction, progress monitoring, that this student will achieve something. It is measurable. It is something that could be evaluated. It is annual, so you write it with the idea of a year from the date that you are writing it, and you constantly will receive progress monitoring notes along the way. So at least triannually for students in elementary school and quarterly at the secondary level, you would get an updated notice of how the student is progressing towards that annual goal. Now, sometimes in the middle of an IEP, a student will actually master that goal or meet the goal that they need, at which point the district would try to reconvene the team and rewrite a goal that is now more appropriate because the student has shown some great success. Also within that IEP is what we would consider SDIs. Another acronym stands for Specially Designed Instruction. These are supports and services that are provided to the students so that they can access the general education curriculum. You may also see some program modifications if there is a need for replacement curriculum, or if there is a need for an alternate type of instruction that would come. Those are some types of modifications that can be listed in the IEP. But in totality, the IEP is a document where the district is presenting what the plan would be for the student. In an IEP, as students become the age or come into the age of 14, they become key members of the team, and that will be about transition, which I will talk about on the next slide. Another piece in there is the assessment, participation, and any accommodations. In Pennsylvania, in grades 3 through 8, students take the PSSA exams, and then in the high school, they take the Keystone exams. So there are specific accommodations that are afforded to some students with IEPs, but there are also accommodations that are allowable to all students on those standardized assessments. Anything that the student would need to access those assessments would be listed in there and documented for any time that they would be taking an assessment. Also, there are local-based assessments. You may hear your children come home and share that they took the CDT or they're working in IXL. They took the Acadians benchmark. Any of those assessments that are given, they are locally designed, the student would also be afforded those accommodations. Extended school year is something that is offered to students who have disabilities if they meet certain criteria and they are found eligible. It is not summer school. It is not the old school way of thinking, oh, I failed a class or I didn't make progress. I have to come to summer school. It is extended school year. So there is a set of criteria which a student could qualify for extended school year for. And that's typically a month of the summer, a variety of days. Some students come 2 days, some students come 4 days, some students come for 3 hours, some students come for 5 hours. It really depends on the individual need, but that runs for our district at least through the month of July. And that is something that would be communicated annually. It isn't a once you got ESY, you're automatically qualified in for future years. It's an annual determination. So at every annual IEP meeting, or if the IEP meeting isn't on a timeline of when a decision can be made for that, you might have a revision for that, but that is discussed each and every year. And then the last two pieces, which I think are very, very important pieces of the IEP, is the educational placement. The district would make an offer of a level of support. Three key words there are itinerant, supplemental, and full-time. That really talks about the amount of direct instruction they're going to need from a special education teacher. The type of support, that's typically related to the disability category that they qualify for, but not always. It could be autistic support, learning support, life skills support. That would be the type of support. And then the location of the program. Our district tries our best to make sure that the programs can be met in the least restrictive environment in their community school. But at some points in our elementary, we do have specific programs that are offered at specific buildings. So a student may actually need to attend a building that is not their home building because of the supports that they may need in their IEP. And then the last part is the percentage of time the student is educated in the general education curriculum. As Mrs. McClure shared earlier, Ms. Quinn, our goal is to make sure that the student can participate and be included in the general education curriculum as much as possible, even if there are accommodations and modifications that need to be made to that environment so that they can participate and they can make positive academic growth. It may be hard. For example, a student may have a very difficult time reading grade level text. They might be 3 or 4 grade levels behind. It is our responsibility to make those accommodations and modifications so that they can access that text in the general education setting and not think, like Ms. McClure said, it's not a place. You have to go to a separate area to do something different. But those are the key aspects of the IEP. On the next slide, as I noted, transition. This is an area that I work very closely in because I supervise the secondary level. Once students turn 14, the state of Pennsylvania and the IEP really adds a whole nother layer where the focus is what happens next. What is a student going to do to meet a post-secondary, an employment, and an independent living goal? So the focus of the transition grid is to get those students ready and engaged in activities and services so that when school ends for that student, they're prepared to either go into adult services or to go into the next phase of their life. Every year, once a student turns 14, this area of the IEP will be revisited. A key part of that is to do student interviews as well as include the parent in the conversation. So each year, if your student's over the age of 14, a case manager would be reaching out to you to talk about what are your hopes and dreams for your child? What types of supports do you think that they will need when they graduate from school? And that is very, very important. Student voice is very important. We encourage all of our students after they turn 14 to start attending their IEP meetings and advocating for themselves. Who knows the child's learning needs better than the child themselves, especially when they're in high school. I love going to meetings and hearing a student say, I really need some guided notes before an assessment so that I can be prepared for the assessment. I really need extra time when taking a test because I work really hard and I can't finish a full test in a 45-minute period. Hearing those things and knowing that about oneself will really help a student once they graduate and once they end school, whenever that may be, whether it's their senior year or whether it's that they age out of special education services and they move on to the next phase, which is adult services. That's not an area that we're going to get into in this presentation. That's a whole other situation, but there are adult services and there are some students who have disabilities that would qualify them for services post graduation through state-run agencies. At the very end of an IEP is the district will provide what is a notice of recommended educational placement or a prior written notice, a NOREP, and this is Ms. Quinn's expertise. So I'm going to toss the presentation back over to her.
So, you've heard throughout this presentation, the three of us are super passionate about what we do. It's important to us as leaders that you, as parents, understand that your voice is also important in this process. And so the next couple of slides are really dedicated to helping you understand as a parent or guardian the role that you play when the district recommends things on behalf of your child. So this document, the Notice of Recommended Educational Placement or Prior Written Notice, is the official way that we as the district recommend something for your child. It's also the official way that you as a parent respond to what the district is recommending for your child. So it really serves two purposes. And it's important for us that you know that that you can use this as the vehicle to respond when the district proposes things for your child. So there are a lot of different situations in which this type of documentation is issued to you. And I'll kind of go through each of them. I don't want to read, but I'm going to highlight a couple of them. So the first one that's listed is the district would issue you an opportunity to respond if the district is recommending to complete an initial evaluation of your child. The forum in which that offer is made is actually through the permission to evaluate, which is what Ms. McClure talked about earlier. We also request a form when we are recommending a reevaluation. There are situations in which parents have an opportunity to request an evaluation. And way back in the beginning, when we were talking about the beginning of the pathway, if you as a parent initiate that request for an evaluation and the district has solid data that indicates that your child is accessing, participating, and belonging within the general education classroom and curriculum with the supports and services that are available to all students, in that situation, the district could say that we are declining your request for an evaluation. We talked about the evaluation process. At the end of the evaluation process, if your child is found not to be eligible for special education, you would be offered an opportunity to respond to the district's recommendation that your child is an ineligible child. After the initial IEP is developed, at that point, the program is formally proposed via this NOREP or prior written notice. There is some, at times, confusion because in an IEP meeting, you're asked to provide a signature. The signature at the IEP meeting is indicating that you participated in the planning session. So you don't agree to anything, nor should you be expected to agree to anything at the conclusion of your IEP meeting. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. If there are any changes along the way, so Mr. Snyder talked about the IEP is, we develop it and we meet about it at least one time a year, but at any point, you as the parent could recommend some change, could request changes to it, and we as the district could also recommend changes to it. And that's an opportunity to come back together as an IEP team. The changes would be appropriately documented, and then you would have another opportunity to agree or disagree with those changes. There could be a situation where the district is not in agreement with your request to make changes to the IEP. That would be another time that the district would utilize this type of communication with you to formally indicate the reasons why, so that you're able to respond accordingly. And then finally, and we have some slides about this a little bit later on, if your student meets eligibility, if your student, my goodness, if your student meets criteria for exiting special education, which is a time for celebration for all, if and when your child reaches that milestone, that is another time when the district formally proposes to exit your child from special education, and then you have the ability to respond to that. You'll see it. I moved forward, but there were two items on that previous slide that I had bolded and underlined, and that is because there are a few times within the process that the district must receive written parental consent in order to proceed with something that we proposed. And those two situations are the initial evaluation. So if the district proposes to evaluate your child, or you request an evaluation for your child and the district is agreeing to it, that first permission to evaluate requires written parental consent for the district to move forward. The other circumstance in which the district must receive the consent to begin providing to move forward is that initial IEP. So after the initial IEP, when you're provided an opportunity to respond through the NORA, the only way that the district would move forward with initiating the special education services that are recommended for your child is if we receive the written approval from you as the parent. In any of the other circumstances that I described on the previous slide, you have a window of time in order to respond to the district's proposal. And after that window of time, which is 10 calendar days, the district could move forward with what is being recommended unless the district receives written disapproval in writing. So every NORA or prior written notice or permission to evaluate or reevaluate that the district issues to you, there's a place for you to say yes, that you agree, or no, that you do not agree. And anytime that you don't agree, that's when we kind of step in to work through any areas of disagreement with you. And that's kind of where your procedural safeguards come in. So this is a document that is sent in multiple ways to you. If you request an evaluation, if the district is recommending an evaluation, or if the district is declining anything for your child, we will offer you a document called the procedural safeguards. And this is a really good resource to help you as parents to understand the rights that you have as a parent or caregiver and how you can participate within your child's education through the processes and procedures that we're required to follow under the IDEA and Chapter 14. So it's a really good resource. We, Ms. McClure, Mr. Snyder, and myself also like to see ourselves as people that help you understand your resources, your rights and resources as parents. And it also helps you to figure out the most appropriate way for you to work with us at times that you may not be in agreement with something that the district proposes on your child's behalf. So I'm not going to get into all that right now, but the big takeaway for this piece is really for you to know that those channels are in place for you to participate. And if there are ever points of disagreement between you as a parent and something that the district has recommended or hasn't recommended for your child, please feel free to utilize us as resources because we are here to do what's right and best for kids. And we're here to work with you as parents to navigate through those areas of disagreement with successful collaboration.
So I mentioned earlier a little bit about timelines, and there are some procedural timelines that are associated with the special education process. So it is expected that the district responds to parents in a timely manner. Notice timely is in quotes because there's not a hard number that is necessarily associated with timely. Our district and what Ms. McClure, myself, and Ms. Quinn like to do is approximately about 10 calendar days. We like to have some sort of response in a timely manner. When it comes to the evaluation or reevaluation report, it must be issued to a parent within 60 days of us receiving that initially signed receipt. So if we ask to evaluate a student for a possible disability and that comes back on May 3rd, 60 calendar days from May 3rd, a report needs to be provided to the parent. A reevaluation report that may not fall necessarily within the signature timelines. That is when a student already is identified. They must be reevaluated once at least every 3 years. That is the date that we hold ourselves by. Even if the signature comes in like 30 days before it's due, that does not reset our
So Ryan,
clock
you're
till, oh,
freezing up a little bit there.
oh,
Let's see if we
sorry.
can have you come through.
Is it better now? Did
Video
I?
seems to be frozen,
Oh, okay.
indicating that here we go. We're back in action. There we go. Looks a little
All
better.
right.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, the reevaluation report is issued within 3 years of the initial evaluation and then continually done. There is an exception to that rule. If a student qualifies under the educational disability category of an intellectual disability, then that student needs to have a reevaluation every 2 years. And then the initial IEP must be developed and proposed to the family within 30 days of the ER, the evaluation report, or the RR date. And then in that timeline, the IEP must be updated once every single year.
Froze up again. I'm not sure what's happening with our internet signal coming out of central office because we have our three administrators all at the central office and breaking up again. There we go. Came through. So you're live again, Ryan. Go ahead.
Okay. I apologize. I hope most of that stuff came through about the timelines.
It did.
The next part we want to talk about is the exiting special education. So we would love to work ourselves out of a job. Our goal is to provide the just right level of support so that students build their own toolboxes to improve their skills and successfully access and participate in the curriculum. Now, full well knowing that if a student exits special education, that doesn't necessarily mean that a disability goes away. One of the categories was deafness or hard of hearing. At school, we can't make hearing come back. However, we can teach skills and we can teach advocacy and we can have that student build up that ability to access the general education curriculum without the need for specially designed instruction. There is a possibility for that. So that's why when you see exiting special education, it doesn't necessarily mean that something magically goes away. It just means that the skills and the commensurate skills have been built up enough so that the student can access the curriculum like a general education student. Our teams regularly use progress monitoring to keep track of this and determine whether or not progress is being made. Teams at any time, parents can request, teachers can request an adjustment to the frequency of the intervention and systemically fade that away and monitor performance as it gets faded away. And then the reevaluation process is always used to determine continued eligibility or if something needs to change. So at least that every 3 years for a student, they are evaluated to see if they still continue to meet eligibility criteria for special education. The only other time that I'm sorry, the slide changed. School personnel or parent can request to evaluate at any time. And the evaluation team members will use all the tools to determine whether the student still meets eligibility. If the RR determines that a student is eligible, then they stay in the IEP process and that continues. However, if the RR determines that a student is no longer eligible, this is where the district would issue one of those notices, like Ms. Quinn shared, that the student is no longer eligible for special education. And if we do not hear back within that 10 calendar day period, and we do not receive that written disapproval, the district could move forward with the exiting of the student from special education and going to a general education student. That's why let's pass a couple slides that Ms. Quinn covered about the NORP is your way of sharing that approval or disapproval to a district recommendation. And then the other time when a student would exit special education is upon exiting school. So that's one thing. So if you are a parent of a student who is a senior or who is coming close to maximum eligibility age, at the end of that time, you would be issued a NORP saying that the child is no longer eligible for school-based education based on accepting their diploma or potentially aging out of school age services.
And I wanted to kind of bring us around to the end of our presentation this evening with a little bit of what we refer to as our district highlights. We pride ourselves here offering a full continuum of special education supports and services, looking at the most appropriate place for your child to receive their support services within the general education arena. All buildings support inclusive practices. We have a Northley Cafe run by our students and an annual craft fair both at Northley Middle School and at Sun Valley High School. We have a very strong peer buddy program, which pairs general education students in supporting the inclusionary practices with our special education population. We have community-based instruction at all 3 levels. So community-based instruction is actually taking what I kind of refer to as your IEP on the road. How do you transfer those skills for some of our complex learners out into real-world situations? Sun Valley High School has a traveling coffee cart here at the administration building. We thoroughly enjoy the delivery of snacks and coffee on a regular basis. And we have some very successful unified sports teams. I do believe, if you correct me if I'm wrong, our bocce team is headed to championships, correct? In
I'm up
Hershey,
again a little
Pennsylvania.
bit, Regina. Let's see if it comes through. We just have to pause for just one moment here.
Okay.
Hung up just a tad.
Okay.
Hoping that I'm coming through for.
On our end, it kind of looks like it's you that's frozen, Dr. Steinhoff. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll let you
So-
guys finish through. Go ahead.
There's 2 bullet points here that are not listed. And
Yeah, it's very odd. We've had a number of webinars and haven't had this challenge with an unstable internet. Not sure what's going on with that. But as Regina was saying, district highlights, full continuum of special education services. All of our buildings have inclusive practices. You know, she mentions the Northley Cafe, the annual craft fair that they do. Absolutely fantastic work. Our unified sports team, we're very proud of. We're very proud of our unified classes, our peer buddy classes at the high school, in which special needs students are paired with regular ed students. They take classes together. Could be art, could be music, PE, could be social studies, all types of opportunities. And one of the programs that we have up there is the Unified Bocce team. And we are really thrilled that they got first place in the region and will be heading to Hershey for the state championship on just a couple of days from now, just on the 27th. Generally, I have to tell you what I'm most proud of is our certainly the 3 administrators here tonight. But our special ed staff, they're tremendous. They're so hardworking. They're loving. They're caring. They treat their students as if they were their own. They know what the goal is. The goal is to give kids support so that they're ready for life, and ideally exit special education services if they can. But if a student's not ready to exit and needs to continue to have those services up to even 21, then we're going to do what we need to do and provide those services for those students. But I noticed, I'm going to let you wrap it up, Regina, because it seems like we're free and we did come through on the internet this time.
good. 2 things that are not bulleted that I wanted to highlight. Here in Penn Delco, we never look at a disagreement as adversarial, ever. We want it to be an opportunity for you to reach out to the administrators or the case managers and set time to speak and talk us through whatever is concerning. And also, sometimes it feels like we request meetings, meeting you to death. But here, our teachers know the philosophy of the administrators is if there is a parental concern, you're going to be offered a meeting to voice your concerns, memorialize those concerns, and get us back on a collaborative path. And with that being said, it kind of brings us towards the end of our presentation this evening. And I wanted to make sure that while we don't have a lot of time for questions and answers, because in this forum, many of the questions will be directly related to your child's needs, which are private and confidential. So we want to make sure that you know that you can reach out to the Office of Special Education and Pupil Services at any time. You can find us right on the district website. We have our office, our number. You can reach out to us directly. And we do have an email that is monitored on a daily basis, special education information at pdsd.org. All of this contact information is found on our district website. And we want you to reach out when things are good, when you're happy, and whenever you have concerns.
And I want to reiterate what Regina said in terms of reaching out. These three fine administrators or offices are pretty much right around the corner from mine. And time again, I walk by and I see the first office, and it's Mr. Snyder on the phone with a parent. I see Miss McClure, and she's Miss McClure on the phone with a parent. And I see Miss Quinn, it's Miss Quinn on the phone with a parent. And that's what we want. That's what we want. We don't want you bogged down, feeling like you have to draft and send long emails. Just pick up the phone, give us a call, send us an email, and ask us to call you. And any one of them will be happy to answer your questions on any topic related to your child. It's important to us, and the fact that you chose to join us tonight to hear this presentation, which is just an overview, very broad, of the special education process, because we know a lot of parents wonder about that. They wonder, might that be right for my child? What does it mean? What are the implications? But we understand that you may have very specific questions, and please reach out and follow up with us and call or email at any time. We're happy to address those questions for you. And conversations always remain confidential, that's for sure. So thank you, Regina, Ryan, and Monica, for a fantastic presentation, a great overview. We had a wonderful group of attendees. I noticed on just one Q&A came through, one of the parents saying that they're going to miss the staff, and I know her and her child, and we're going to miss them as well. That's for sure. But this concludes our last session of Penn Delco Cares. Next year, we will have 4 more evening webinars, and we always welcome ideas and suggestions. So never hesitate to reach out to me as a superintendent and say, what would be really helpful for us as parents? We'd like to hear more about fill in the blanks, and just let me know what that is. We all love this district. We have fantastic kids in this district. We're really a lot of wind at the sails of academics, the arts, athletics, and activities. All those things are going especially well right now, thanks to the communities that we have, the parents that we have, and really wonderful kids and staff in our building. Everyone have a wonderful evening. Again, don't hesitate to follow up. We really appreciate your time, and I thank you, as always, for your support of the Penn Delco School District.